A spiritual Psalter, Saint Ephraim the Syrian, Psalm 23. We acknowledge as one and the same person, perfect God and perfect man. He is God, the Word which became flesh. Because if he were not flesh, why was Mary selected? And if he is not God, whom does Gabriel refer to as Lord? If he were not flesh, who lay in the manger? And if he is not God, for whom do the angels descend from heaven to glorify? If he was not flesh, then who was wrapped in swaddling clothing? If he is not God, then for the honor of whom did the star appear? If he was not flesh, who was it that Simeon held in his arms? If he is not God, then to whom did Simeon say, Lord, now let your servant depart in peace? If he was not flesh, then whom did Joseph take up with him when he fled in Egypt? And if he is not God, then who fulfilled the prophecy, out of Egypt I have summoned my son? If he was not flesh, then whom did John baptize? If he is not God, to whom did the Father say, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased? If he was not flesh, then who hungered in the desert? If he is not God, to whom do the angels attend and serve? If he was not flesh, then who was summoned to the marriage in Cana of Galilee? If he is not God, who transformed the water into wine? If he was not flesh, then who received the loaves in the desert? If he is not God, who fed the 5,000 men and women and children with him with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish? If he was not flesh, then who slept on the ship? If he is not God, who rebuked the sea and the waves? If he was not flesh, then whom did Simeon and the Pharisees sit with for the meal? If he is not God, who forgave the iniquities of the harlot? If he was not flesh, then who wore a man's clothing? If he is not God, then who healed the woman having an issue of blood when she touched the edge of his clothing? If he was not flesh, then who spat upon the earth and made clay? If he is not God, then who restored the vision of the blind man with that same clay? If he was not flesh, then who wept at the sight of Lazarus' grave? If he is not God, then who commanded him to go forth from the grave 4 days after his death? If he was not flesh, then whom did the Jews arrest within the garden? If he is not God, then who then cast them to the earth with the words, I am he? If he was not flesh, then who was condemned before Pilate? And if he is not God, who scared the wife of Pilate in a dream? If he was not flesh, then whose clothing was stripped off him and divided among the soldiers? And if he is not God, then why did the sun become dark when he was crucified? If he was not flesh, then who was crucified upon the cross? If he is not God, who shook the very foundations of the world? If he was not flesh, then whose hands and whose feet were nailed upon the cross? If he is not God, then how was the veil of the temple ripped in two, the rocks split, and the graves opened? If he was not flesh, then who hung upon the cross between the 2 robbers? If he is not God, then how could he make the claim to the thief, Today you will be with me in paradise? If he was not flesh, then who cried out and gave up the spirit? If he is not God, whose cry made the many saints' bodies, which were asleep, arise? If he was not flesh, then whom did the women behold lying in the grave? If he is not God, of whom did the angel say, He has risen, he is not here? If he was not flesh, then whom did Thomas touch when he placed his hands in the holes of the nails? If he is not God, who came through the doors that were closed? If he was not flesh, then who ate by the Sea of Tiberias? If he is not God, then on whose orders were the nets filled with fish? If he was not flesh, then whom did the apostles see borne up to heaven? And if he is not God, then who ascended up to the joyful shouts of the angels, and to whom did the Father declare, Sit upon my right hand? If he is not God, and also man, then our salvation is a lie, and the declarations of the prophets are lies.